coming to you from the Parish Healthcare Podcast Studio.
Hey there, thanks for coming under the rainbow with us. I'm George Estevez. Along with my friends, we are talking LGBTQ+, whether you're one of us or you're an ally. Welcome to the show that isn't afraid to talk about it. We're talking about conversion therapy in this edition of Under the Rainbow with George Estevez. Thank you guys so much. I'm not doing this alone, by the way. I'm doing this with a panel of experts. We're going to talk to very interesting people. So we're going to go around the table, ask you for your name, your title, and why you are here today. What are you going to contribute to this conversation? We'll start to my right. Go ahead.
I am Stephanie Preston Hughes. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I'm part of Mental Health Counselors of Central Florida, and I just want to bring the mental health perspective on this in terms of what we say as professionals about conversion therapy, and I'm air quoting that on purpose.
You're air quoting it because why? You don't think it's therapy?
It is not therapy. It's been recognized as not therapeutic and in fact harmful by every major mental health and medical organization there is. So I don't know that we have a better word, but I'm very clear that it's not therapy.
All right, Stephanie, let's go ahead to my far left. Who are you and why are you here? Why have I asked you to come here today?
Well, my name is Randy Thomas, and I am the Executive Director of Thrive LGBT+. And I'm here today because I was the former Executive Vice President of Exodus International. Exodus International was the largest pastoral approach to conversion therapy for 37 years. And I helped to shut it down in 2013. So I come to the table tonight with the perspective of someone who went through it personally for 23 years and also as a leader.
That is pretty impressive that you are on the other side of this. And also, as a human being, you are now outwardly gay and you are in a fiancé relationship.
Yes.
What does that feel like?
It's amazing. You know, I in 2015, I came out. I was very scared. I had a long night of the soul for about 5 years or longer. And I never thought that being a happy, healthy gay man of faith was possible. And today, 4 years later, I'm engaged to the love of my life. And it's a dream. It's literally a dream come true. And I hope that others will find their way out of the conversion therapy world and live their dreams as well.
All right, so we have Stephanie, who is going to talk about a movement she's doing, and we have you. We just introduced you, Randy, so thank you so much, a former Executive Vice President at Exodus. And we have one more guest here. Please tell everyone who you are and why you're here.
My name is Jordan Hunter, and I'm here to give a personal perspective because I myself went through conversion therapy in 2011. I was also raised in the church environment that encouraged me to go towards that sort of thing.
Raised in the church, we talked earlier, you struggled with homosexuality. We have one person here. I put this question on my Facebook page, George Estevez, WFTV, and they pretty much asked a very blunt question, which is, what do you do in conversion therapy? Jordan, what did you do in your version of conversion therapy?
Well, there's lots of theories. There's lots of people who have really no idea. They think, oh, it's shock therapy. They're going to make you, watch pornographic material and like shock you or burn you or something to make you it like that. But it's honestly, I would say it's a lot more deceptive than that. It's mostly talk therapy, and it's shame-based talk therapy that walks you through the process of encouraging you to hate yourself and to try to resent your own God-given sexuality.
Talking about what Jordan just said, Randy, I ask you, you were an executive at Exodus based out of Orange County, by the way, right?
Correct.
Orlando, Florida.
Yes.
When you hear Jordan describe what conversion therapy is and how he lived through it, and the fact that you were a proponent of that, a leader in that, how does that make you feel?
It's a very difficult. It's hard. I've known Jordan for a very long time. We met, I think, the first time when you were still in it. It's very difficult to know that not only did it rob me of 23 years of my life, but I used to promote it, and that it's had negative consequences for others. And so I carry that burden of knowing that I promoted and the teachings that I helped give hurt people. And so that's a consequence that I will take with me for the rest of my life.
And you had a life-changing experience talking about hurting people. We'll get to that in a second. But Stephanie, talking about this and hearing Jordan's experience, now you have clients that you deal with. You must have clients that have maybe even gone through something like this. How do you counsel someone through this?
The first thing I'll say, and it's going to sound really simple, is just to absolutely believe them with what they're saying. Mm-hmm. While Jordan didn't have the experience of being shocked, I have worked with people who've had experienced some more physical aspects of the conversion therapy.
Go ahead and describe that. What are some of the physical aspects of 30 years ago or 40 years ago or whatever that was?
So it would be exposing someone who's wanting to rid themselves of a same-sex attraction to material where they're seeing an erotic image of two men together and they're pairing that with an averse stimulus. So something like a shock or extreme heat or cold, holding ice cubes in their hands, or some kind of physical discomfort or pain.
You say this stuff and it brings me back to, I don't know, the 1940s, 50s, before we knew exactly how to treat people. This isn't again, I don't want to get into the debate in this particular podcast, but, with a mental condition, this is not a mental condition, but, it brings you back to that time. And Randy, thinking about that, I mean, the fact that existed, 20 years ago, mm-hmm. 25 years ago, 30 years ago?
Yep. Well, cultural bigotry and religious stigma against LGBTQ people has been around for generations. And it manifested in the culture wars, and it took on many different forms. You had the aversion therapy, the cognitive behavioral stuff that happened that was disgusting. You have pastoral counseling, where people are shamed, that they're told that they're broken, that somehow you're not living up to what God created you to be. And so whether it's a person who has a license in their frame on the wall, or a pastor or a parent, they're pushing cultural bigotry and religious stigma, and that is damaging and deadly.
It's funny because Stacy Moss commented on my Facebook page, totally against it. The conversion treatment is telling someone who they are and what they feel is somehow wrong. If this continues, what's next? Treatment for the ethnicity of who they love? And where do you stand with that, Jordan? I mean, when you see someone talk about that, you obviously agree with what they're saying, because we're going to hear from you in a second about your story. What do you think about her comment? Like, what's next? If this is okay, what's next?
I mean, I completely agree that it is extreme, and it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't, because this is something that you can't change. And even people who, I mean, Randy, you even, you went through this for a long time. You went through it for many more years than I did. And at the end of it, you were still gay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and many other folks who spent 10, 15, 20 years trying to fight this are still gay.
Randy is so gay, his fiance is currently in this room right now listening to this conversation. That's how gay Randy is. I mean, we laugh to bring some levity, but okay, so let's go ahead and get into Jordan's story. Raised in the church, you struggled with homosexuality, and what was that like for you?
Which honestly makes me want to throw up to say those words now, because for me to say, I struggle with homosexuality, just saying that reminds me of all of the shame that I used to have when I would say that. That is exactly what I would feel when I was saying those words, is just this mountain of shame. I struggle with homosexuality. I'm happy to be gay now.
No, but that wasn't the case back then, Stephanie.
You're told what to feel, you feel as if you're supposed to feel that way. So there's almost this sense of, I am supposed to feel ashamed. Well, why? They didn't before. And this is what I see working with people who have truly diagnosable post-traumatic stress disorder, not as a result of their sexual orientation or gender identity, but because someone tried to metaphorically beat it out of them, and the treatment caused the distress, and now they're coming to me for treatment, the lucky ones. But most people won't go back to therapy, George, because they were so traumatized by their experience in conversion.
So they won't even go to therapy to fix the Airquote therapy of the conversion because they're so averse to it now.
I mean, some do, but I think a large majority would not.
All right, so you were going to say, Jordan?
And the verbiage that I was using wasn't verbiage that I would use myself. I was using that verbiage when I was 14. No 14-year-old is like, I struggle with this. They're like, no, I feel this way. I feel that way. I feel like crap. They don't say I struggle with homosexuality. That was a term that I was taught, and that was a phrase that I was using to explain it and make it feel like this is safe. I'm handling it. I'm going to fix this.
And we're going to talk about the fact that you came to Florida to not be gay. You came to Orlando to not be gay. We laughed about that earlier, but what does that mean? When did you come? Who brought you here? What was that like?
Well, I was born and raised on the on the west coast of Florida, so I'm a Florida boy. But I went to Atlanta, Georgia, to go to Bible college because I was raised in the church. I had a pastor who is gay and chose to have a wife and children and abstain from that sort of lifestyle, as he would put it. And he had a mentor in Atlanta who ran a Bible college. Well, I went to go and attend that Bible college. Well, lo and behold, 2 months into that, I end up, let's just keep it PG, and we'll just say, making out with someone. And
a man,
making out with a man. And after I told them later, in this mess of emotion and tears and and so much shame, I told them maybe 2 weeks later after it had happened, and I never had another instance happen again. I just refrained from all sexuality, kept on the straight and narrow as they wanted, and at the end of the year, when I applied to come back for a second year, they said, "This is clearly a bigger issue than we can help you handle. So we're going to encourage you to come to Orlando to be a part of this program." At first, they didn't know where to send me. They had no idea. They just wanted me to focus on this more. And I was like, okay. So they found a random person who led this ministry in Orlando, which they knew nothing about. And they said, okay, well, we're going to dump you here for 9 months. And then after that, maybe you can apply and come back after.
So they sent you somewhere to be fixed of this situation where you made out with this guy and they thought that you could be gay, correct?
Exactly. And them sending me to this person was something that they knew nothing about. They didn't know anything about the ministry that I was going to be a part of in Orlando. They didn't know anything about what his methods were, who he was, whether or not he was a credible person. They knew him on a very, very casual basis.
And I want to ask Randy his experience with a very well-known organization in a second, but Stephanie, you as a therapist here, when you hear that someone's sending a child or a young man to a strange place to fix something, what does that kind of create in your head?
It's extremely frightening to me, and I have to ask where we draw the line. And some of the questions I have from folks are about, freedom of religion, and I am not good at theological arguments, and really that's not what the conversion therapy ban conversation is about. Have your beliefs. I'm not going to try and convince you that homosexuality is okay. You believe what you believe. But as soon as we're talking about engaging in something that is scientifically proven to cause harm on a minor who cannot legally consent to medical treatment, we have a whole different ballgame. That's what makes it abuse.
And that's a conversation and what you're working for to ban conversion therapy in Orange County. We're going to talk about why you decided to go county by county with that in a second. But Randy, Exodus, your story in a paragraph. How did you end up at Exodus?
In 1992, I became a Christian. I wasn't raised in the church. I was out in the 80s, but I was not a very healthy person.
So you were out?
Yeah.
You were like a flag-flying homosexual.
Absolutely. In the 80s,
Did we have a rainbow flag back in the 80s, Stephanie?
We did.
Yeah, it was in 1978 it was created.
Nice.
Yes. And I was super gay, but I was also...
you were super gay as opposed to now. Now you're just a little
now
gay.
I'm just kind of tempered gay.
All right, so back to you being super gay.
So I was super gay, but I was super unhealthy as well. And so I ended up in a 12-step program. One by one, Jesus started picking off all my friends. We became Christians, and being in Arlington, Texas at the time, we were surrounded by conservative theology, all of the stigmatized cultural bigotry. And I didn't buy into it at first, but when I visited the Exodus group there in Arlington, they weren't what I was expecting. I went in thinking they were going to be blue-haired, Bible-thumping, pew-jumping religious zealots, but they ended up being thoughtful. They never forced me to do anything. However, what I didn't realize is that I was buying into a system of belief, almost cultish. And I wish now that I had run down the street to the largest gay church in the world in Dallas, but I didn't. And it was my first sense of grounding, my first real system of belief. It was I had been raised in an abusive household, so it was really... because I had gotten involved in the dark party scene after being thrown out of the house, I didn't really know healthiness.
And you talked about your dark party scene. We're talking all sorts of things that could have landed you in jail and or dead.
Absolutely. I do have stories about running from the police. And I did overdose in Louisville.
Stephanie, what was Randy running from during that time?
You know, it's a tremendous fear that if I am who I really know I am, if I let you see that, you will not love me. And it's internalized into internal homophobia. I am not okay. I am not worthy. And, you know, part of my message, my mission as a therapist, and just on a personal level, is to let young LGBTQ kids know they're okay. We have to remember the chronological context around this. Randy, we're talking the late 80s and early 90s. I was laughing when we were talking before.
Right.
The way I got access to information was to go to the local library in my small town in Ohio, and they had like 2 books, you know, and that was it. This is pre-internet.
And hearing you say that in my story in 2005, I felt that way. I felt if this is something that you know about me, I'm going to be unlovable. I'm not going to be able to have my community. I'm going to be ostracized from the church, and I'm just going to be excommunicated.
So to not deal with those demons, Randy, what you did is you were like, all right, I'm going all in.
Right.
And then you found Exodus, and then you climbed the ranks of Exodus.
Correct. I started out as a participant in a ministry there in Arlington, and it quickly became a small group leader. And then I just started enjoying the affirmation, repeating the talking points, conforming my story to fit the narrative.
Do you remember a moment, a story you conformed, something you did, something you were told that made you feel good?
Well, it comes more like scapegoating my past. We were taught that it was okay to blame being gay for all the unhealthiness instead of actually dealing with the underlying issues like emotional dependency and PTSD and abuse and all that other stuff. And I remember thinking that this, you know, these excuses, this hyper-spiritualized scapegoating of what it means to be gay, it felt relieving because it was the first time, even though it was unhealthy, obviously, it was the first time I felt like I had any answers.
They were fake answers, it sounds like.
Well, they weren't true.
They were what other people wanted to hear. And when you are struggling emotionally, internally, and someone else is affirming you, even if it's saying the wrong thing, it feels really good to get that acknowledgement. It's a system of positive enforcement.
And Randy, before I ask you, what was the breaking point where you broke off and decided to take down Exodus, or amongst the group of people who did? If you're a friend right now listening or watching, or a parent, and you think and you want to be like, well, maybe he's just playing with dolls now. Maybe she just wants to be, you know, a firefighter now. Again, I'm going with ridiculous stereotypes, but just for the sake of argument. What do you do as a parent? Because someone just commented, Shayla, saying, how would a parent do this to a kid and be like, no, go here, become a girl, wear pink, or be, you know, wear blue. What do you do to someone who may be not knowing what they want to do or unsure? How can you affirm them without pushing them in any direction?
You know, I think, first of all, kids are pretty resilient, but it's also the nature of cognitive development to be exploratory and to discover things and colors. And, you know, gender we're understanding is much more fluid now. And what's funny, we were talking before, you know, some of the treatment and some of the conversion therapy camps and places was to have the women act in hyper feminine ways. That was the way to make her not a lesbian, and have gay men act in these hyper masculine ways. And we're going to play a game of football. And so it just, exactly, right?
I hate football,
right.
By the way.
It doesn't work. The movie, But I'm a Cheerleader, which I think is late 90s, is a hilarious, very campy depiction of it, but that's not far from reality.
I was also not a good cheerleader. So either way, I was screwed, I guess. Randy, tell me, so there was a moment in your life, and this is where it's going to take a slightly serious turn, that you were like, I've had enough. What was it? When was it? What happened?
Well, in 2013, a friend of mine named Michael, I always say he's my beautiful Michael. I've known him for decades. He was a certified genius, Mensa member, a counselor himself, had the best laugh. And at the end of January of 2013, he committed suicide. And he had been a member of the group that I had led in Texas. And from what I understand, of course, there was a lot of issues going on with him, but one of the reasons why he took his life is that he had gone back to being gay and had a relationship, and the relationship took a bad turn. And because of the conditioning, the toxic theology that underlies conversion therapy, he thought that God was punishing him. This was a grown 40-something man, a genius, a counselor, who was dealing with this, the after effects of conversion therapy, and it took his life. Conversion therapy took away our beautiful Michael. His life is not here because of the consequences of conversion therapy. And why conversion therapy to minors is so important is because if that can do this to my beautiful Michael, what is it doing to the 12-year-old trans kid? What is it doing to the 16-year-old girl who thinks that she may be attracted to other girls? It's not fair to the young people, and it should be banned as soon as possible.
And that is what Stephanie is working on with a big group of people here in Orange County. Thank you for sharing that very emotional story. Stephanie, talking about that situation, the problem with conversion therapy, according to critics, is, okay, let's say you try it, it doesn't work, and you get out, as beautiful Michael got out. And he's like, I am gay. I'm going to be in this beautiful relationship. He didn't know how to accept himself as a gay man. Explain that.
How would he know how? When we repress gay sexuality, we repress all sexuality. So when you come to the point of realizing it's okay, I really am going to express myself as a gay man, you still have had no education on embracing your sexuality just as a person, that it's a normal, healthy part of being just a living person.
You don't even have those 2 books in Iowa or Ohio that you had growing up.
Right, exactly.
Jordan?
I can honestly relate completely with probably what your friend Michael was feeling and going through, because I remember when I left the ministry that I was a part of and I started living life on my own, I was then making the decisions for myself, and I still told people I'm straight. I'm not gay.
You had an issue. You really weren't. You left because you're like, this isn't for me for a lot of reasons. But then you still couldn't accept your homosexuality.
I left because the person who was in charge was honestly very mentally unstable. He was extremely unhealthy, and there were a lot of warning signs. And so I got out and I started living on my own with a couple of roommates, and it took me years. It took me years before I could actually view another man as someone that I could actually date. Because for me, it was like Stephanie, before we recorded here, talked about kind of the shadow self and having this darker side of yourself that you feel like you have to hide. And that was how I felt, was I needed to hide this. So I felt like I could only use men for sexual purposes for about 2 years. And that was what I did.
So then you could have been reckless. If you weren't reckless, you could have really gone down the wrong path.
Absolutely. It was a couple of years before I could even go on a date. It was a long time before, even after I had moved out and I was living on my own as an adult, I was terrified. I remember the very first nightclub I went to was Pulse, and the person who brought me there had to stand with me outside for 45 minutes, talking me through it, explaining that I was going to be okay because I was so afraid of a coworker seeing me there.
And a lot of people experience that, though, Stephanie. When I first came out, my first gay club was Pulse here in Orlando as well. And I was freaked out for 5 minutes. It wasn't 45. But I was freaked out. That's to what degree is that not normal behavior to when you embrace and kind of go into that society that you feel a little timid?
It makes so much sense to me. If you haven't been exposed to something, you are not desensitized to it. You're highly sensitized. So all this stimulus is just kind of invading your brain like, oh my gosh, this is new. What's happening? You have no context for that.
And it's just overwhelming because of the conversion therapy, because he was in a place that tried to suppress that for so long.
I think that's part of it. To me, my saying is we're only as sick as our secrets. I'm a therapist, and what happens just by people coming in and giving voice to what they've lived is healing in itself. The idea of finally going to a place where you see other people like you is so affirming and validating. And we have to also talk about a biological component. Our brains are very complex machines. And even when we want to change something and do something different, there's some wiring, and it takes a while to retrain our brains out of shame. So it takes great effort to overcome and persist, but you also need some support. And to me, that support is community, the LGBTQ community.
So many people here on my Facebook page, conversion therapy should be banned. It is cruel. Why would someone do that to their child? People can make you change who you are, says Lisa. Amanda, I'm against banning most things, but this may be the exception. So people are on this path of recognizing this may not be a good idea, a path that you took, Randy, and you made a decision after beautiful Michael took his life. And quickly tell us, what did you do? How did you take it down? What was that like?
Well, during when Michael left this world, we were already trying to decide if Exodus was still viable as an organization. We had started being more honest about our messaging.
What does that mean, honest about your messaging? Like, it's not working, people? The jig is up?
Correct. We basically admitted that the struggles continued. And while we were still trying to figure it out ourselves, the network started falling apart. When Michael did what he did, I determined personally that at the end of this, when the board voted on whether Exodus should continue or not, I was going to leave. But I was going to finish that project because it was an important project.
So you stayed in it even though it took your friend's life, even though you knew it was wrong. You're like, I'm going to stay in this to see if I can help bring it down.
Correct.
And you did.
I did. I helped to make the case for why Exodus was no longer viable. We were initially started it because organizationally it was falling apart. The donors were leaving, the networks were splitting, those types of things. But then after all of those communications, all of those conversations, we realized that Exodus had not only failed its mission, it had become a tool of destruction. And we could not pass it on to somebody else who would continue it. We needed to close it down. And we made that case to the board in June of 2013, and we announced the closing of Exodus on June 19th of 2013, and that is the second most important decision I've made in my life.
What was the first?
Well, the first is saying yes to Dan.
Dan, his fiance, who's sitting in the room. Aww.
Do we have glitter?
Just cannonballs of glitter just went off in the podcast studio. Well, that's fascinating. And Stephanie, and we're going to get to your reason as to why you are working so hard with a group of people to prevent this from becoming a thing and keep it from happening, actually. But Jordan, on your list of notes here, I have faith versus sexuality. Where are you with that now? Because clearly, Bible study, Bible college. Are you a man of faith?
Oh, absolutely. But it is a lot different than it used to be. Honestly, I feel like my faith has come to a place where I don't tell people no very often. And I don't tell people that I can't agree with what they think, because I think that there are a lot of people. Here's the thing. If we're going from a biblical perspective, I would take the Apostle Paul's stance of saying, like, I don't know anything except for Jesus Christ and him crucified. But aside from that, y'all can argue about whatever you want. Exactly. But I don't know anything except for that. So for me, I would say I have my own faith. But with everything else, let other people debate about it. I'm not interested. I'm just going to sit back, enjoy my life, and love people, and let that be the paramount rule.
But you still agree with the whole conversion therapy not being a source to change people or young adults?
Oh, absolutely.
So that you do agree on?
I don't think that repressing your sexuality is healthy. No, I think that that's very damaging, and I've seen that played out more. And it's not just damaging for the individual who's doing it to themselves. It's damaging for the people that they will later potentially victimize because of what they've done to themselves.
All right, so Stephanie, question and then your mission. What do you do when someone comes to you and says, hey, therapist Stephanie, I'm 20 years old and I'm figuring out who I am, and I think I like boys, but I don't really want to like boys. I'm a boy.
And this is a boy talking.
Yeah, identify as a boy, and I kind of like boys. Did I sound like I was talking like a girl?
Well, no,
More stereotypes. But seriously, like, what do you say to them? How do you approach that? Because would that be conversion therapy?
It's a great question. I was asked this question when I was working at University of Central Florida providing therapy to college students. And so the correct answer, and the answer I would give, is you need to understand that the American Psychological Association, the American Counseling Association condemn the practice of conversion therapy, and ethically, I am not comfortable giving you, I don't practice it, and also I am not willing to give you a referral to somebody who does practice it.
But if I want to talk about my feelings and say, I'm uncomfortable when I'm attracted to another man's penis, or I'm uncomfortable, like, what do you...
Absolutely. We can talk about those things. My responsibility as a mental health professional is to be very transparent about the kind of work that I do. And so somebody is not surprised when they're coming in to see me. I am going to affirm their identity, and we will talk through those aspects of shame, where that's coming from. Chances are it's from, other people outside of that person's life.
It sounds like that person just wants some answers because they're unclear of just about life, who isn't at 20 or 25?
Well, and part of what happens when we rely on one institution to tell us what's okay and what's not is we fail to develop our internal sense of values, of decision making, and then we get broken in that way, not because of our sexuality, but because we're robbed of this chance to learn to kind of calibrate and navigate life on our own.
You were going to say something, Jordan, earlier?
Oh, I was just going to say that this conversion therapy is so obsolete and outdated. It's almost like we should view it as the practice of bloodletting, how they would use that to treat, you have the flu, we're just going to let some blood out of you and maybe that'll cure you. No, we know a better way. We understand what the real process is. We understand what the problem is. If someone is unhappy because they're gay, it's because that they may have been raised in a culture where they were taught that was wrong and they need to be affirmed. And so that's the proper way.
And that's why, yet you're saying that, and I hear the words coming out of your mouth, but that is still existing out there. People who believe that is the way to go, which is why Stephanie has her mission. Tell everyone your mission.
My mission is to...
What is your mission? What is your purpose in life right now?
That's like a really big question. I feel like I should charge you money to answer that.
Let me ask you questions now.
The mission that I have is the mission of the One Orlando Alliance, which is the group of agencies, LGBTQ leaders who have come together after Pulse to work on issues facing our community. Mm-hmm. And the group came up with 10 really focused agenda items, and one of those was conversion therapy, to ban that practice in Orange County. We would like to see it statewide. There's some local state elected officials that have worked in Tallahassee to try and have this be a state measure, but it's never gotten out of committee. And so, we have to start where we are. And the reason Orange County is so important is because Exodus, the biggest conversion therapy group ever, was headquartered here.
So what would it mean to take Orange County in the column of banning conversion therapy for the movement?
It would be hugely welcoming for the LGBTQ community. It would send a statement that we do not tolerate hatred towards LGBTQ folks here, and that we value all expressions of sexual orientation and gender identity.
George, can I jump in real quick?
No.
Please?
Fine.
Please, George.
Go, Randy.
Just kidding. Go ahead.
Yeah, this effort to ban conversion therapy to minors in Orange County, there's a petition that people can sign at converttolove.org. And what people need to know is that, yes, it's dated. It should not be happening, but it is happening right now.
Yes.
In Orange County. I know of a meeting that's happening as this podcast is being filmed. It happens in Orange County. There's the Freedom March, which is basically conversion therapy proponents this Saturday. There's an Equip conference from the largest ex-gay conversion therapy ministry coming up in October, right after Pride. That's all happening here in Central Florida. And we need to make a very clear message that it is past due that Orange County bans this abuse against young people within its borders. Young people from all over Central Florida are brought here for conversion therapy.
What would you say if I said, what if you're 18? What if you're 25 and you say, you know what, I want to try this because I want to be ungay? What's your stance on that? And we can go around the room. Start with you.
When it comes to adults, we live in a country that has freedom of religious conscience, freedom of assembly. They can do that. I'm going to do everything I can, if you'll let me, to convince you to not ruin 23 years of your life like I did. But I can't stop you. What we're talking about with banning conversion therapy to kids, these kids don't have the legal authority to say no. And they don't have... they can't stop the abuse that's being foisted against them. Banning conversion therapy to minors is easy. The discussion it generates is not. And we will continue that discussion to help adults realize that this is a thing of the past, that this religious bigotry, this systemic toxic theology, it's time for that to be exposed, to be brought out of the closet of Orange County, and help people to realize that they can be happy, healthy, whole LGBTQ people.
Well said, friend. Jordan, you went through it. You came out on the other side. How many years have you been okay with being gay, being able to date, being able to be in a relationship? How long are we talking here?
Oh gosh, it's what
Like
year
a
are we in
week,
now? No.
a month?
It's been a few years. I've had relationships. I am now happily married to a wonderful, wonderful man. He's not here with us tonight, but he's taking care of our dog Bella.
Oh, so how long have you been married?
We've been married it'll be 2 years in December.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Those stories, though, Stephanie, they don't always happen, right? I mean, as we saw with Michael, Randy's friend who took his own life, how do you justify that? What's your feeling on that? Because not everyone is a Jordan.
It's a terrible tragedy, and that's why I do what I do. And, if we can save one life, it is absolutely worth it. I don't want this legacy to pass on and to be spread. It's really about taking a stand. We've heard personal stories, and I think Randy and Jordan are so courageous. It takes a lot to say, I hurt somebody. It takes a lot to say, I did this thing, and it really was very painful. So the vulnerability is going to help people. Coming out is an act of helping people. But at the end of the day, if we're allowing this practice on minors, we're advocating for, we're saying it's okay to inflict harm on a minor child.
And I will say, I've been out of this for years. I'm happily married. I have a wonderful husband that I love very much. But there are still times, if I'm completely vulnerable with you, where I will have a thought in the back of my head. Am I doing this? Is this right? Am I going down the wrong path? And as the years have gone by, it's become a lot easier for me to recognize that voice for what it is, that it's the remnants of the therapy that I went through, that it's the remnants of the culture that I was submersed in, and that it's not true. But to have that with you for years afterwards, that's not easy.
And it shouldn't be. And like you said, you were in that place, that ministry place, for 9 months, I believe you told me?
9 months. But before that, I grew up in the evangelical church. I was hardcore in leadership. I wanted to be a pastor.
So you had talked about situations and people in your life that also kind of suppressed the homosexuality, and seeing that as an example, without naming who it is or what position they held, seeing that as an example, what did that do to you, seeing that, like, well, if he can suppress it and be successful in this organization or have a family or do that, and it was, 20 years ago, I can do the same thing. That was your role model when
Absolutely.
You were a kid.
I mean, I believe the person you're referring to, I'm not going to say names, but I had a role model before I went to Bible college who was like a brother. He was like a big brother to me, and he was someone who I trusted. He had the entire youth group was such a tight family unit, and to everyone on the outside, it looked like the most incredible church and youth group that ever. It was on fire, is the word that the church would use.
On fire for the Lord.
Absolutely, and he was someone who was extremely affectionate. I remember there were times when he would be alone with myself and other guys from his leadership team, and there were a lot of things that just seemed very subtle that for me, because he was like a big brother figure, I didn't call out, I didn't tell anyone, I just let it slide. And he was someone who I knew was gay. He had told me this because he was ministering to me. He was helping me to walk me through it. But later on, this past year, he's now facing allegations of having molested several friends of mine back 10 years ago. And they just, after 10 years, had the courage to speak up about it and say, this is what I'm going through. And I view that man as a victim in his own right because of if he wasn't in that culture that told him that he couldn't be gay, then his life and his choices, I believe, would have been entirely different.
It's the statistic part too. So we're hearing the stories, but what we know, George, from data from the Trevor Project, the nation's leading organization trying to reduce LGBTQ suicide, is that folks who are told that being LGBTQ is not okay, subjected to change, are 2 to 3 times higher risk for depression, 3 to 4 times higher risk for substance use, and 8 times, 800% risk of increase for suicide. That is not okay.
And it sounds like what we need to do here is have that affirmation, which is what you talked about, the affirmative therapy, or have people around you that will support you to make the right decisions and not end up like Randy did for those 5 or 6 years when he was gay and out and doing lots of things, including running from the cops, is I believe what you said.
Right.
And, that's what's needed is support. And you eventually created a group. You were there, you took it down, Exodus. And how long from that moment till you were able to be in a relationship with the man here across from you, who is your fiance? When did you become okay with intimacy, emotional intimacy? When did you become okay with wrapping your arms around your big gay self? Like, how long did that take?
I love the way you put that.
That's true. I mean, that's... Yeah, I should be a therapist, right, Stephanie?
Absolutely.
When I first came out in 2015, I was terrified. I thought that as soon as I walk into a gay establishment or a gay group to volunteer, they were all going to look at me and hate me, and I was terrified of intimacy. I thought I was celibate, called to celibacy for 23 years. I didn't know how to relate to people. I'm still working through issues. Don't say anything.
He's pointing to his fiance. Do not say anything.
And I'm still working through intimacy issues. But what I found in the gay community is there are great counselors. Back when I first came out, it was in Middle Tennessee. There was nothing. But today we do have...
We have Stephanie.
We have Stephanie. We have the Zebra Coalition. We have the One Orlando Alliance. We have the Orlando Youth Alliance or Association. We have so many resources. We need to be supporting them and affirming their efforts instead of wasting time abusing kids behind conversion therapy doors.
Well, I think what we're going to do now is kind of wrap up the podcast here, talking about conversion therapy. And I always like to end with a takeaway here. We heard Randy and his story of being gay and then being ungay and then climbing the ranks of Exodus and taking Exodus down. I'm exhausted just going over your life, by the way. We've heard Jordan's story, how he was a very religious person, man of faith in the evangelical world, I believe you said, and then you had a moment where you were in some sort of conversion therapy, and then you came out on the other side, and now you are married, and you feel that now you're finally getting to grips to being 100% whole. Is that correct?
I think wholeness is a journey that we're all on.
There we go. And then we have Stephanie here with her own movement to ban conversion therapy here in Orange County for minors, and it's incredible, Stephanie. What takeaway do you want people listening, whether you're LGBTQ, whether you're a parent, an uncle, a friend, what is the takeaway you think people need to have after listening to this or watching this?
Loving LGBTQ young folks for exactly who they are saves lives.
Well, that's pretty powerful. Randy, how do you follow that up?
Amen. I totally agree with that. We need to spend more time loving the LGBTQ young people. They need it. They still need it as much as they ever have, and it's time to stand up for them.
I just want to share one quick thing about that. It reminded me of after the Pulse tragedy happened, and I went to the very unofficial vigil that happened. I was on my way there, and I was walking by myself to meet up with friends later, and I had 2 people that were just angels to me. It was a man and a woman, and they had shirts on, and they the shirts were they had buttons that said do you free mom hugs and free dad hugs. And for me to have that happen after so many years, to just have a mom and a dad out there saying, you know what, I want to be out here and I want to show love to the community, and to just give a free embrace with no strings attached, just free love. that was so moving and so powerful. And that's what the LGBT community needs. If someone comes to you and they say, I'm gay, I'm lesbian, I'm trans, I'm bisexual, they just need to hear, I love you.
Wow. And your eyes are watering up, just reminding yourself of that moment.
Who's crying? I'm not
I
crying,
love
George.
it. I loved it.
I've made all three of you cry today. I think everyone's eyes watered today. And you know what? Crying is emotion, and emotion is making sure you're real and still in check. You know, if we don't cry every now and then or have these moments of realization, then who are we? You said being whole is a journey. I mean, we're still all on this journey. I mean, I'm lucky if I'm like 20% full. At this point, I still have like 80%.
I'll take you to dinner later. Boom.
Fantastic. Exactly. I want to thank you guys so much. This has been fascinating for me and for everyone listening and watching, because you hear about these things and you hear about Exodus and you hear how Orange County was the center and you hear therapy and how it's necessary and I love you and free hugs and all that. But to hear it from someone who lived it, Jordan, from someone who lived it, Randy, and from someone who lives it through the eyes of all her clients and friends, Stephanie, it is fascinating to hear all your perspectives and to really wrap your head around this topic and the fact that we're all just human. At the end of the day, we need love, we need acceptance, we need guidance, but we need understanding more than anything else. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Randy said it best. What was it? Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you guys so much. My guest, Stephanie, thank you so much. Randy, and thank you so much, Jordan. When we come back, take a quick break. We're going to debrief with William, our producer, who's been manning the buttons this whole time. We'll be right back. Thank you guys so much. Okay, everyone, we are back. I'm George Estevez. We're joined now by William Folks. Hey, William.
Hey, producer Will here.
Producer Will, yes, a fireside chat for those of you guys. It's on video, and we literally have a fireplace going in the TV behind us. We don't know how that graphic got there, but it did. So we're wrapping up conversion therapy. Wow, that was a lot. What did you think?
Somebody was cutting onions in here. I'm just gonna say that.
You?
Somebody.
Oh,
it
no.
was. It
Did it
pretty,
hit you?
Yeah. I mean, well, their raw emotion hit me as well.
How so?
I mean, literally, the Beautiful Michael story. That one was, I mean, there was other powerful stories, of course, and personal conversion therapy, but that was just, it's just a personal story, and he lost his life like that, and he was a part of the problem.
Yeah,
and
Jordan's story too. After Paul's going to one of the rallies and just getting a hug from people.
Yeah,
because that's what
something simple like that.
That's what he said that people need. And then talking to Stephanie too about what struck me as a therapist. She's just like, people just need acceptance and people just need to know you're listening.
Yeah.
And what Jordan was talking about, you just, it's almost like he's still feeling the effects of what it was like when it was like oppressed in him, his homosexuality.
It's so deep in his subconscious that even now, all these years later, every now and then he has that inkling that, wait, who am I? Why am I doing this?
And Randy, I mean, is now fiancéed, but that wasn't the case. And he came out and he said he was so uncomfortable coming out because it's not like you go to conversion therapy or you go somewhere and you're like, I'm going to try this camp. Yeah. You're like, you know what? It's swim camp. My parents sent me here.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't like swim camp, so I'm just going to go. I'm not going to come back next year. No, that swim camp stays with you. And those lessons that you were taught or not taught stay with you, even though you know they were wrong or even though you think they were wrong. That's the part. That was my biggest takeaway. What was yours?
I mean, it was honestly also great. I mean, Stephanie, her just like, because everyone had such emotion, but her being so clinical and everything she said, and it was just so precise and like.
That's kind of her job.
Well, yeah, of course. But she's very good at it. I'll just leave it at
true.
that. But just that, it was just a nice little juxtaposition there that she was so matter of fact with everything, and this is this and this, and I can give you this information, but I will not do this, that, and the other.
And one of the things that I didn't say during the podcast is, when I came out to my parents at the age of 31, I won't say how long ago that was.
2 years?
2 years ago. I remember my dad, being very disappointed, obviously, and to this day we don't speak. But my mother was like, well, my dad was like, why didn't you tell us? We would have fixed it. And my mother's like, well, we can take you to a psychologist.
Keyword fixed.
Fixed. My mother's like, we can take you to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I'm like, what? I'm 31 years old. I'm good with where I am just because you're not. So, I mean, what if I would have been 14 and it would have come out and they would have said that? Guess what? I would have gone to a psychologist.
You wouldn't have been able to tell them no.
No, exactly. And that's a part that's frightening to me.
And you talked a lot about that with just how it's in the youth, like they're not able to fend for themselves, even legally.
Oh.
Like they're not able to make those decisions.
No, and as long as it's legal, they're going to be able to go if their parents want to send them. So that was my biggest takeaway.
Yep.
So, Will, thanks so much for doing this.
course.
As always, it's always fun
Thanks
kind
for
of
having
picking
me.
your brain.
Yeah.
He sits behind the monitor.
Nice by the fire.
Exactly. We are literally by the fire, like I said. He sits behind the monitor and all the buttons and stuff, and he makes sure this all goes on. And so it's great to have you on this side of the camera because I really get a good perspective as to you, who identifies as a straight guy, listening to this stuff. And you are a straight guy millennial, which is fantastic to me.
So all these layers to me. I never knew I was so complicated.
I know,
So
you
came
are
to this point.
complicated.
Yeah.
Anyway, Will, thank you so much, and thank you guys again for listening, for watching. This has been another edition of Under the Rainbow with George Estevez and William Brooks.
See you guys.
Recorded in the Parish Healthcare Podcast Studio.